Hi, Seth. Thank you so much for joining me. We want to talk about some of the difficult verses about Israel in Scripture. As I was thinking about our conversation, I can't forget how shocked I was to discover that the vast majority of evangelical scholars from the leading seminaries, universities in the world are really holding to supersessionism, replacement theology, a belief that the church has completely replaced Israel.
I'll never forget, a very well-known evangelical scholar got up in a room filled with scholars, and it was about 200. It was one of the bigger sessions. And he said, I'm very proud to say that I believe in replacement theology. And he got a standing ovation. And I remember it wasn't even tied to his presentation. It was just and I walked out with it felt like I had a knife in my stomach.
The question that we fundamentally need to ask is, did God truly change his mind and abandon Israel?
A lot of replacement theology is couched in more fulfillment theology.
Yeah, the language.
So they're not actually saying that God changed his plan for Israel, but that Israel is redefined or newly defined based on faith in Jesus. In other words, when a Gentile now accepts Jesus, he's considered part of true Israel. Just like, Jesus is the new Israel, the true Israel, and everybody that accepts him is true Israel. And so now those Jewish people that don't believe in Jesus are no longer Israel.
There's the verse in Romans 9 that talks about the Israel of God. And I think many times people that come from a supersessionist or replacement theological perspective say, well, there you go, the Israel of God. It's not the nation of Israel, it's the church.
One of the biggest problems with that perspective is Romans. It's interesting, he starts the discussion in Romans 9 where Paul is weeping over his people. And he says of them in the present tense, to them belong the promises, to them belong the covenants, to them belong. So Israel's calling is based on promise. It's based on grace. It's based on God's purposes. So a replacement theologian has to actually explain how is it possible for Paul to be weeping over a people that obviously have not put their faith in Yeshua the Messiah. They are a people that Paul is willing to give up his salvation for them, and yet to them belong the covenants, to them belong the promises. And that's exactly where he ends in chapter 11. Because Israel rejected Yeshua,
on a national level,
salvation came to the Gentiles. And so Paul says in 28, so they are enemies of the gospel for your sake, for your benefit, but they are beloved for the sake of the fathers.
I still meet a lot of people, and I think you do as well, that think that somehow, Jewish people have not only a free ticket to heaven kind of deal, but also that the Jews are better in some way. The truth is that God said already in Deuteronomy 7 and 8, he says, I've not chosen you because you're strong or many of you, or because you're beautiful or smarter than everybody else. Quite the contrary. Because you are not those things, that's why I choose you, to show my glory, my strength.
You need to read Romans 9 through 11 50 times, and then you need to read Romans 100 times. Consider his argument. Has God rejected his people? Because right now, you've got, all these nations that were not God's people that are coming to faith. And so, maybe God has rejected Israel. And so then Paul says in Romans 11, in the first few verses, has God rejected Israel? May it never be. What's his proof? He pulls out his identity card. He says, I'm an Israelite. If God's rejected Israel, what about me? If Israel's rejection of Yeshua resulted in blessing, which it has, how much more blessing will come when they accept him?
And we read in Romans 11 that it states that all Israel will be saved.
The longing for the all to be saved ought to be the longing for every believer in Yeshua. In Zechariah chapter 12, and at that time in the future, the nation,
right, on a national level,
at a national level, right, will recognize the one whom they have pierced. And so the all there is a future all, and it's in context to the present remnant. We believe that, we're not saved by our good works, and we're not unsaved in that sense by our bad works.
By failures, yeah.
Right? Which is the gospel. We are saved as a result of God's gifts that are irrevocable. And so I think one of the issues with replacement theology, they have to overcome, how is it possible that Paul clearly states unsaved Israel, the Israel that has, of Paul's day, that rejected Yeshua, still has all the privileges, all the promises, all the covenants, and the election as a people that did not believe in their Messiah. I think that that is the biggest evidence that replacement theology simply does not work.
Thank you so much, Seth. It's been a pleasure, always a pleasure to chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much.